Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Quick question. Do you want more muscle tone? Of course you do. Now that is an interesting word, muscle tone. Maybe you want to tone up your legs or your stomach or your arms or your back or your butt. Heck, maybe you want to tone up your entire body. And that's why you're here. That's why people come to see me. You want to know all the best tips, tricks, and secrets on how to get toned as quickly and effectively as possible. That sound about right?
Actually, Garrett, I was hoping for it to take 15, 16 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, of course.
Or we could do it in 6 months or so.
Spread it out nice and long. Yeah, of course. That's what everybody's into. Please, the last thing I want to do is shape up quickly. I don't want that happening.
Heavens forbid.
Well, when it comes to tone, here's the first thing you need to know. Everything you've heard about tone is absolutely BS. And that's our podcast for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. That pretty well takes care of everything we need to say. Now, let me break that down for you a little bit. Tone's kind of a nonsensical word to me. You know, nothing tones a muscle. Nothing defines a muscle. Nothing sculpts a muscle. Nothing makes a muscle ripped or cut or slim or lean or any other silly adjective that essentially means the same thing. The one that really gets me, I love, is the longer lengthening. This is something that ladies used to tell me back in the 90s. And they would tell me, I want a longer, leaner muscle because they heard it on commercials. This exercise makes you have those long, lean muscles. Now, think about it, Pablo. We know each other. If something makes you longer and leaner.
Okay.
Longer and leaner.
Is that are you using a medieval stretching rack?
Well, I mean, that I don't know. And obviously, I don't know the longer, leaner muscle exercises because you would think that if you want to make something longer and leaner, that somebody that's 5'6",
right,
and has a master's degree in fitness management would definitely have the desire to learn that particular exercise. Because then I would be 6'2". You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I tried to explain it to, especially ladies that came in and said that to me. If we're making a muscle longer, then we're taking the joints that hold like your elbow joint and your shoulder joint, and we're increasing the distance. If not, we're going to cause a sagging muscle. All these are different ways of describing the word tone. Well, let me explain what I mean by that and explain what really are after. Because this kind of goes to what I was talking about in my perception versus reality and perception versus measuring. We have a concept. We perceive we know what the idea tone means. But in this context that I'm talking about, muscle tone refers to having a sufficient amount of muscle mass plus a low enough body fat percentage for that muscle to actually be visible. That's what tone means. That's what people are looking for when they're looking for tone. But the reason I'm talking about all things tone today is that typically our perception of the word tone and what we're trying to attain needs to be done by acting on the muscle. In order to get there, you're going to have to do those exercises that produce tone, a tone muscle, as opposed to a flabby muscle, I guess. I'm not really sure what the opposite of that is. And there are many fads. There are many fitness machine fads and salespeople. There are many fitness enthusiasts or people in the fitness market that love selling that word tone because it really doesn't mean anything. We can tone you up. Legally, they didn't tell you they could do anything for you. It just sounds really, really good, and you bought it. And they could tell you they'll tone you up 100% of the time because tone basically means nothing. So, in a nutshell, the less fat you have covering your muscles, the more toned and defined or sculpted you look. The more fat you have covering your muscles, or if simply not enough muscle is present, the less visible your muscles will be and the less tone you will appear. Muscle minus fat equals tone. That's what you're looking for. Okay, so whenever a person says they want to tone up, they're really just saying they want their muscles to be more visible than they currently are. And of course, guys want this, but believe it or not, ladies do too. In fact, I have more ladies that come and say they're interested in toning and getting more tone than I do guys. So they're actually looking for that more fit, more lean look. And so they're actually wanting their muscles to show a little bit. Nothing crazy, ladies. Don't go nuts over that. So how do you make this happen? It's by either losing more fat, and this is the most common reason that people don't have that quote unquote tone look. They're not getting the goals of being, as they say, tone. Losing the fat is probably the best way. Because early in the 60s and 70s, I use this example a lot. I talk about female bodybuilders. And I remember speaking to a lady who was a counselor who thought she knew something about nutrition and was offering some kind of a diet program at the same time. And because of that, there were civic groups and one dangerous situation, as far as I'm concerned, a local high school that hired her to come and talk to some of her girls on some of their female athletes about exercise. And I thought that was crazy because here's a counselor that thinks he knows something about nutrition going out and trying to speak on exercise, yet another field that she has no training in. And she was talking to them and told them that they should not ever do resistance training. Wow. Yeah. And why? I actually sat down with her because she years later contacted me with her husband at the time, was interested in working out. And she said, well, of course I don't do any resistance training. And she did not know that I knew that she was popular for saying this. And I said, why? And the whole reason was because, those female bodybuilders, they look just grotesque. Well, yeah, back in the actually early 80s too, but 70s, I'm not so sure it was so much in the 60s, but 70s, 80s, I'm not quite into the 90s, because by the time 90s came around, female bodybuilders had really discovered the steroids and really got heavy into that. A lot of that's changed now, but they've really gotten heavy into that. But the earlier female bodybuilders weren't big. They weren't big at all. If you actually stood next to them, they were very tiny, in some ways diminutive. But they had gone on these crazy crash diets that had gotten rid of that layer of fat that women have that men don't have. And that's not safe. And so they would have this incredible, as we call it, definition. You'd be able to see their muscles. And so when they're not standing next to a point of reference that you're familiar with, you're going to think that looks huge. Well, actually, it's not. That person's overly toned is what's going on there. But typically, losing more fat, getting that body fat percentage down is one way, and probably the most significant way you can have those muscles show up, have that more leaner look, I guess you'd say. And it's hard even talking about this, not using the word tone. I understand the word itself and being descriptive. It's not like the way I avoid using age to describe things happening. This happens, and you hear me saying it all the time. People assume this happens as time passes on the calendar. I don't like to use age because it's not a determinant of fitness, or your activity does not determine. Let's don't go down that subject. I'll go crazy. So I'm not so much against tone, because I understand what people are trying to define when they're using the word tone. And as I say, as I talk about this, it's difficult not to use the word.
Can I derail you and get you off on another one of your favorites?
What's that?
As you pop that water bottle?
Yes. Well, that's the one way to get me to stop on that one.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when people say, I want to be tone, or I want to be lean, you know, I want that look with the defined abs.
Right.
They're going after what they see in magazines and movies.
Yes. Yes, very much so.
Yes. I mean, that is an appealing image that has been created.
Right.
But like, I know professional wrestlers.
Yes.
I know bodybuilders. I know actors. Mm-hmm. Usually when they're for that picture that you end up seeing, they're dehydrated.
Oh, big time.
On top of, usually, yes, they are certainly to some degree, fit, and they've been working out.
Right.
But they will then purposely dehydrate themselves to gain better definition for that photo shoot or that film or to perform in front of you. And then as soon as they're off, they don't look like that anymore. No. So in some ways, aren't we dangerously chasing an image that really isn't realistic at all?
Right. And actually, a whole nother show. I'm glad you bring it up, but you're exactly right. Most of those pictures that you see, they're temporary. Nobody, I won't say nobody, because some people can live like that, but
that's why they use body oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Like they want to look sweaty, and
in those situations, of course, exactly. In those situations, I have plenty of people that if you were to ask somebody, would you like to have only 4% body fat? And I know scores of individuals. I'd probably be one of them. Shoot, yeah, raise my hand. I'd love to have only 4% body fat. Here's the question: do you want to live there? Because what it takes to live at, like what you're saying, those pictures. Yeah. That's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, I have a buddy who's a bodybuilder, and for a solid week or two before his competitions, he puts himself through absolute hell with regard to his diet, his water intake, everything. Right. And to him, it's worth it. And he looks fantastic. Certainly when he gets on stage and he's all, got the fake bronzer stuff, and he's all dripping with oil, and he and his wife do it. And they look great. You go, I want to look like that. Exactly. But the thing is, are you really wanting to go through that?
Too true.
I'd take 60% of that.
Right.
and live a life I can actually live.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And I guess, like you say,
it's your level of wellness. That's your level of what?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly the case there. You were talking about bodybuilders. There were several people I've known in that field, but my most vivid memory of that is all the people bodybuilding. I'm having difficulty finding words at the moment, but they would stumble on the simplest of sentences. And you think about it, they're so dehydrated. They're malnourished, and they're so dehydrated that their cognitive ability is affected.
That's a good point.
Oh, wow. Big time. And 30% of your water is used by your brain. But
you just explained why every Jean-Claude Van Damme movie sucks. I think you just figured it out. You cracked the code right there.
Maybe so. Well, if it weren't for the excellent dialogue and plot twists, you know what I mean? So, but in that scenario, there's one guy that couldn't talk. I mean, I was like his tongue wouldn't function. And that's how low carbohydrates he had in his diet. I mean, I don't think he'd eaten for a few days. He won the competition,
right?
And used to see these guys after the competition. But that's getting a little bit different than.
How do you feel now that you won?
Yay!
I don't even know if it was about the best he could give me. So
that's a dangerous game to play.
It is.
Chasing image.
It is. Absolutely. And so that's unrealistic. I can understand why people do that for an athletic competition. Many athletes of all sorts do those kinds of training. But seeing that image, seeing those individuals, the point you're making, and thinking, okay, well, I'm going to look like that. I want to be like that. No, it's not a good way to go. Absolutely so. But back to it, we were talking about different ways of getting tone, getting that what you're looking for, and building more muscle is another way. I mean, there are other times when people have a low enough body fat. Now, it's not as often do you have this situation, but do you have a low enough body fat, but really just don't have a developed shoulder, don't have enough muscle there. And I can use some rather horrible examples of this, but if you think of somebody that's gone through starvation, they don't look defined. They don't look toned. They look emaciated. You see this a lot with runners, believe it or not. People that are runners and they don't do any kind of resistance training. They just run all the time. These are individuals that typically get the runner's high. Again, I'm not against that, but this is why I tell, especially my runners or my clients or friends that do nothing but cardio, that, hey, resistance training has got to be a part of it, and so does your protein intake, because you feel like you're fit, but actually you're growing weak because you're cannibalizing muscle and you're not replacing it around the body, which gives you that emaciated look. But the simplest way to get to that quote-unquote tone is doing a combination of both. And you can do that. I'm going to do a whole show on that, a podcast on gaining muscle while burning fat. And a lot of people argue about those two being opposing, or do one, don't do the other. Well, I'm going to do a whole show explain that. And actually, that's not the case. It's pretty easy. So now, I can't go through the show without going through myths. I think every show I talk about dispelling some kind of myths, and tone's a big one. Well, here are some stupid myths about how to get toned. And right off the top, I think if we could stop with this one, if people would just cut this out, I would feel a lot better. I think I would have actually done something to help people. And that is, lighter weights don't make you toned. Now, that drives me nuts when I hear that. You know, I don't want to lift heavy weights because I won't get toned. I'm just going to lose lighter weights because I just want to get toned. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it also, probably the biggest problem I have with that is that word lighter. It's not defined. You know, what does light mean? I mean, light to you versus light to what you should be doing. It doesn't give me a number. You know, there's a great a Robert Frost poem that the star is asked about how it lives and what have you. And then somebody speaks to a star and the star says, I burn. And the poet says, you know, that didn't tell me anything. Talk about centigrade. Talk about Fahrenheit. Talk about lighter is the same way. You know, I mean, lighter doesn't tell me anything. We've got to break down muscle tissue in order to make changes, period. End of story. You want to maintain it? Work the muscle a little bit. You don't really have to break down muscle tissue in order to maintain it. You got to keep it going. But if you want to make changes, you've got to break down muscle tissue. And doing lighter weights, just by the definition alone, the weights that I used to use that challenge my muscle, I'm now going to a lighter one. Therefore, you're going to typically lose muscle. You're doing, this actually isn't a word, but I think you'll understand what I mean. You're actually detraining yourself. When you're bench pressing 200 pounds and you start training yourself for 135, you're going to lose muscle. You're going to get weaker. Higher reps make you toned. Yet another ridiculous idea. Light weights, high reps. I hear that all the time. It's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It is not the same thing by any means. If you don't match the intensity level, then lighter weights and higher reps does not do the same thing as heavier weights and lower reps. I'm not against a higher rep count, but think of this. When you're putting together a routine and you want to use a lighter weight and higher rep, think of this. I've got to dig a hole. It's the same size hole. It is 5 feet deep. Now, do I want to use a shovel or do I want to use a spoon? It's the same thing as saying, Lighter weights do the same thing as heavier weights. Lighter weights are more reps. Yeah, that spoon will get that hole dug. You're going to need a lot more repetitions to get that spoon to dig that 5-foot hole than you are with a shovel. And if you're not matching the intensity that you're digging with that shovel, with that spoon, you're never going to have the same results. Certain types of exercise make you toned as opposed to others that I guess bulk you up. And this is an idea that free weight exercises and/or compound exercises are for building muscle, but certain machines, isolation exercises, and/or special toning exercises are for burning fat and getting tone. Now, this is a myth. Now, Papa and I were talking, just gave me a great idea. We're going to go through a lot of the ridiculous exercise fads through the ages. I'm looking forward to doing that show. But one of them that I'm going to give you a little brief prelude to that show, one of them that was very popular, I don't really know when it started. I'll find out when I do my research, but I want to say 80s, possibly 70s, and that were the toning tables. I don't know if you ever heard of toning tables.
A toning table.
Toning table. I actually saw it was a toning facility. Actually, I remember one being in my hometown here and then one just across the bay. And it opened in like the mid to late 90s. I couldn't believe they were still in existence. These were tables that you lay down on, and the tables actually moved your body. Like your legs, you would move up and down on one table, and you go to another leg and you strap yourself in, another machine, strap yourself in, and it would move your arms around. And they were called toning tables. And so you didn't actually do the activity. The machine moved you.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible?
I've never even seen that.
It's called toning tables. And people would talk about going in those and actually losing weight. Yeah, they were losing muscle mass and they were getting bigger because they were getting a lot more fat on their bodies.
Well, they were losing weight.
There you go. They were losing weight.
Losing weight in their wallets.
Absolutely losing weight. That's true. The gravitational pull of the earth is affecting them. But just like originally when Slim Fast came out and said, give us a week, we'll take off the weight. Because the original Slim Fast had no protein in it whatsoever.
Really?
Therefore, yeah. So yeah, give us a week. We'll atrophy all the muscle off of you and you'll lose weight. You may gain size, but you will lose weight. So
yeah, we got to do this show. This is going to be good.
I'm looking forward to it. Really looking forward to it. So, but that goes back to that certain machines make you still breaking down muscle tissue. You can do it with machines. You can do it with free weights. And one of them doesn't make you bigger and another one doesn't make you more toned. For years, I had guys coming in that felt they had to bench press the entire dumbbell rack in order to gain an inch. At the same time, I had ladies coming and looking at those same dumbbells and saying, if I just look at that 8 pound, I'll gain all this size. And all I could think was, I wish you guys would change brains.
Can we Freaky Friday this, please?
Yeah, yes, please. That would Freaky Friday in that situation would help a lot. So here's the truth about muscle and fat, about dealing with those. The truth is, in terms of your appearance, the only thing you can do to a muscle is make it bigger or smaller. If you want it to have it show up, just trim the fat. That's the way you get your tone. And keep in mind what we were talking about earlier, about seeing those pictures and what goal you're actually going for. Because at the end of the day, we're all seeking for the same thing. Podcast One, a personalized fitness podcast. We all want to live our own level of wellness. Here's wishing that you do so.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.